This is Heart Rhythm TV. My name is Janet Hahn, and I'm here at FHRS 2024, live from Sydney, Australia, with Jim Freeman from Yale University. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And so you just came hot off the stage from the late-breaking clinical trials #1, and I was super interested in what you presented today because I find that it will probably be very applicable in our real lives. And so you talked about a study that you guys have done looking at the variations in Pacemaker Battery Longevity, or CIAD, I should say, battery longevity. Am I right? So what was sort of the aims of that study?
Yeah, so actually this is the second of two sister studies. The first study we presented at HRS in the United States looking at ICD battery longevity, and this is our study looking at pacemaker battery longevity. And the idea was to use real-world data. The data comes from Pacemate, one of the large remote monitoring data aggregators, and I really want to thank them for that because it's remarkable data and it's been an incredible opportunity for us. And we wanted to look at battery longevity for these devices and compare battery longevity by vendor, as well as by device type. And when I say device type, I mean sort of single chamber, dual chamber, biventricular devices. We also wanted to look at estimated battery longevity and how good are the vendors at estimating battery longevity, and how good can they do with that, so that when we say to our patients, this is what we're estimating, we're not sure, but based on this data, actually I think we have some confidence. And then we wanted to look at the parameters that most impact battery longevity with these devices as well.
Sure. I mean, that makes sense. I think, when I implant any device in any patient, the first question they always ask me is, how long is this going to last? Does the battery actually last forever? And the answer is always no, right?
Yeah.
So, but I'd love to be able to give them a little bit more hard evidence. So what did your study find?
Yeah, so I think there were a few really important findings. The first is that with each additional lead, there's a pretty substantial cost in battery longevity. And I think it's been understood that there's a cost going from a dual chamber to a BiV device, but we quantified that at about 2 to 3 years of battery longevity cost. But also going from a single chamber to a dual chamber device is not without cost. So there's about a 2 to 3 year cost in battery longevity for defibrillators, a little bit smaller for pacemakers, about 1 to 2 years, but a substantial cost. And I think that's important when we think about what device to implant, and we think about how many leads we really do need in certain circumstances. It's very relevant in the ICD space, of course.
Sure.
Where often for primary prevention, we're putting in dual chamber devices, but may not always need that second lead. The second thing was looking at vendors. So with our ICD data that we had presented before, we really found that Boston was best in class with regards to ICD battery longevity. And I think anecdotally we had all sort of thought that might be the case, but we quantified that at about 2 to 3 years of battery longevity. Interestingly enough, when we looked at the PACER data, that wasn't necessarily the case. So there were, with older generation devices, it was kind of variable. Single chamber devices, dual chamber and BiV didn't necessarily have the same vendors that were best in class. But when we looked at the newer generation devices, actually the devices implanted in the last couple of years, we saw Medtronic actually coming out with the best in class for battery longevity. The other take-homes were that estimated battery longevity estimates from the vendors were very good across the board. So what we did there is we looked at the first estimate of battery longevity 3 months after implant, so that allowed a 3-month window for parameters to be changed and whatnot. And then we compared the estimated battery longevity after that 3-month mark to the observed battery longevity. And what we found again was that all the vendors did a very good job with battery longevity. That allowed us to then, with confidence, look at devices implanted in the last couple of years and say, okay, what's the estimated battery longevity, and compare them across vendors and device types. And that's where we were able to look and see that Medtronic is, again, doing a little bit better than the other devices. But importantly, all vendors had a marked improvement in battery longevity of 2 to 4 years, comparing their newer generation devices to their older devices. So I think a lot of really encouraging data and very helpful for us as we talk with our patients about their devices.
Absolutely. I think that is probably one of the biggest take-home points, is that as technologies have gotten better, all batteries have gotten much better over time. So that's great. So how do we take this home and apply it at this point?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost is this idea of being thoughtful about the number of leads that we implant. I think that's important for us. I do think the vendor data has some impact. It's not the only thing we take into account, but it's part of what we need to be considering as we are implanting these devices, particularly in our younger patients. And then I think it's helpful to know that we can have confidence in estimated battery longevity estimates. And I think that's helpful for us as we talk with our patients. We're still working on the parameters that most impact battery longevity. So I think one of the promises here is that we can try and get some insight into programming parameters and how to really optimize longevity, and we're still working on that. So we're excited that's to come down the road.
No, that's awesome. Thanks so much. This is such valuable information, very applicable, of course, to everybody all across the globe because we implant hundreds of thousands of devices daily. So thanks again for sitting down with me today, hot off the presses from LBCT1 here in Sydney. So thanks again, everyone, for watching. This is Janet Hahn with Heart Rhythm TV, APHRS 2024. We'll see you in the next episode.